Justice free and with us! The wars are over! One land, one king! Peace! Oh! Stand back! Be silent! Be still! That's it. And look upon this moment. Savour it. Rejoice with great gladness. Great gladness. Remember it always, for you are joined by it. You are one under the stars. Remember it well, then, this night, this great victory, so that in the years ahead, you can say, I was there that night with Arthur, the king. For it is the doom of men that they forget.
Who now has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country?
Georgian townhouses on the moon, the highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way. Small modular reactors under every village green. This is Anglo-Futurism.
Listeners, welcome back to the Anglo-Futurism podcast. Calum, welcome back to the King Charles III space station. And I must inform our fans, as you perhaps know, a beloved fixture of English society has been on a trip to a former colonial territory. Now, Calum, that's enough about your trip to Singapore, which we will talk about a bit later. But first, some reflections on the King's visit to the United States. We've just watched his speech to Donald Trump. Calum, you didn't like it.
I thought, Tom, you were going to grant me the fig leaf of being able to sort of nod along whilst you enthuse about it. No, I didn't like it because I don't share your appreciation for an old king with a twinkle in his eye.
Should we recap some of the jokes for those who haven't watched the whole thing?
Go on, Tom.
Twice.
Hit us with some of the jokes.
Well, there was a prime Anglo-Futurist moment, as identified by friend of the show Henry Palmer, when the king was talking about the Artemis II mission, Artemis II as he called it, and he informed Trump that he checked the papers, and unfortunately the moon was already part of the Commonwealth. And
yeah, I think that okay.
I that hit the spot for me. I also enjoyed the presentation of the bell from the conning tower of the submarine HMS Trump. Are submarines HMS? I suppose they are, whatever they are. Anyway, so they had this bell for Trump, which I thought was a great bit of diplomacy. All in all, I think it was a great exhibition of the power of a multi-decade head of state who has great articulacy and knows how to charm difficult leaders. And we'll return to some of these themes later, perhaps. But whoever wrote his speeches, I think, deserves their elevation to the Order of the Garter.
I
watched him coming in on horseback.
I find so much of this stuff twee and sort of embarrassing. It's the king forced to sort of make patter about the Boston Tea Party and Britain's
as if he's Boris on the after-dinner speaker circuit.
1812 attempt to remodel the White House, just as Trump is doing. It's pandering to the Americans with their kind of lame post-Hamilton revisionist attitudes to the separation of Britain and America. And but I said this before we recorded, Tom, that I'm such an uber reactionary that anything that doesn't have the king, dissolving Parliament, taking his position as an enlightened despot, and traveling everywhere in an Apache gunship was unlikely to meet my approval.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very poor second. Don't get me wrong. I want to see Charles blazing towards the White House at the head of a cavalcade of gunships just as much as anyone else.
Look, I have just been reading the biography of Bismarck, and a topic that I'm now going to sort of become the most annoying man in the world about, that every scenario that I can possibly describe in sort of metaphors to do with
poor Jesse,
Emperor William I of Prussia did this, don't you know? And that's why, I think you should give me the last slice of toast. But I think Bismarck here, renowned as this great diplomat, the core or like foundation upon which his diplomacy and actions were built was his big stick.
Oh, 100%.
I think 100%. I think so much of this, like what covers for what is described as diplomacy these days is the dinners, the circuits of like speeches to each other with sort of little of substance underneath it.
It's dinner party chatter. It's pedantry. Sure. And I think particularly with this capricious White House, the good it will do won't necessarily last. I mean, the whiskey tariffs have been removed. Great. I mean, one positive thing that seems to have emerged is that this leak from the State Department that the US, in retaliation for Europe's failure to support its war in Iran, might undermine its or might withdraw its tacit support for us in the Falklands. This seems to have been revised, and people in the State Department have been briefing to British journalists that actually we're fine.
And actually, to be fair, Trump is probably one of the few people where this kind of activity actually does have an impact, because his mind can be changed through interpersonal relationships. I suppose.
Yeah, he said this about the whiskey. He said that the king it hardly took anything with the king to convince him.
I suppose what I'm talking about. I'm describing.
It's a king to king mode of behaviour.
I'm probably referring more to the kind of inter-European leaders, the Davos circuit, which is, people going and patting each other on the back, people unworthy of the kind of pageantry that they receive from each other. When Starmer goes and is piped into Berlin, to me that feels a bit pathetic.
Well, surely you enjoyed that speech from Charles more than you would Starmer making a speech at a similar occasion. Charles is the embodiment
I don't like, I suppose,
of some of the vestiges of what is still great about this country.
No, maybe I'm not sure if I would agree with that, actually.
He's not some functionary sent from the HR department.
No, but the promise of the Glorious Revolution, or the basis of it, was that the king or the monarch is allowed to kind of appear above politics, I suppose. And maybe this is slightly grubby.
Grandeur.
This is a slightly grubby kowtowing that needs to take place.
But that's where we are, right? And it may get worse. I assume you read everything that Unheard publishes as a loyal friend.
I read everything you write, Tom.
Thank you, Calum. But we had the newsroom had a piece from Niall Gooch, who was responding to Mamdani's refusal to meet Charles one-on-one, and that is apparently because of the Koh-i-Noor. So the mayor of New York has a bee in his bonnet about this incredible diamond that's in the Queen Mother's crown, and I think I don't know that this is the Indian government's position, but
no, the Indian government has accepted and has briefed that the Kohinoor, they should not agitate for it.
And it has,
actually,
passed from empire to empire. Now
it was given freely by the Sikh empire.
Was he 12? Anyway, look, this is by the by. It's a sort of game of musical chairs. The music has stopped. The diamond is ours. And be the merits of our ownership of the diamond as they may, it is, as Niall Gooch argued, a symptom of our times that Mamdani, the mayor of New York, is espousing this sort of third worldism. And there will come a time fairly soon where the kinship between the US and the UK is much lessened by this incredible demographic churn we're going through. Right? It's no longer the case that the president is guaranteed to be a WASP. I mean, the fact is that most Americans aren't Anglo-Saxon anymore. They used to be, now they're not. It's becoming, if they're a plurality now, it's becoming a much smaller one. So we've got to make the most of this relationship while we can.
Yeah, that's
short of huge remigratory events in both countries. This is about as good as it gets.
That is probably true. There's a I think it was Bovril Gesellschaft, my prophet and idol,
friend of the show,
who talked about I can't remember the name of it.
Leafing through all of Bovril's tweets about toe sucking and form-fitting knitwear to get to the one that he wants to talk about.
It was a specific one about an American ship captain coming to the aid of a British ship that had been sort of attacked in the Far East, and that they sort of recognised that as fellow Anglo-Saxons. Oh, here we go. At the Battle of the Taku Forts, Josiah Tattenall disobeyed strict orders and came to the aid of a stricken British ship because he couldn't bear to watch his fellow Anglo-Saxons being shot at by the Chinese. Every figure from the USA's first century would have happily done the same against Thaneda. Thaneda is a US congressman who was kind of engaging in that sort of separatist, as I said, post-Hamilton myth of George III as the great tyrant and America, everything escaped it. Totally ahistorical. Actually, it was against Parliament and whatever. But I think you're right. And actually, I was talking about this with a friend, that whether Britain or America will become less Anglo faster. Because I was struck, because I was recently in San Francisco, and I think I've told you about this. The real sense you get, well, that I got when I was out there, of a kind of relaxing of rules, whereby you felt that there was kind of less of a dead hand on your shoulder. And I mean, this is all kind of, I spoke to the taxi driver kind of journalism, but it was things like going into a cafe, and when asked if you wanted milk in your coffee, they just handed you the jug and you could kind of pour as much as you wanted, and then you handed the jug back, which is a very kind of human interaction that in a country where you have your government health and security agency rating on the front of your door that ranks you 1 to 5, that sort of thing would, I'm sure, incur demerits, and would therefore see you be punished. So I wonder whether what will diminish faster, right? The from the Georgian, carousing liberal country, when you get this fork, whether the spirit of freedom will be extinguished faster in the US or in Britain, because we've fallen from that far from that as well.
Oh, I mean, we're electing openly sectarian MPs now.
No, but I say it not purely as a demographic thing. I say it just like as a values thing, right? That if you take liberalism and the ideas surrounding the rule of law, a a restrained government that allows people to exist as they wish. That is a unique and remarkable invention that has changed the world. And it would be a shame if that vanished. And it is under pressure. And I appreciate this is maybe not our sort of traditional position, but it would be a shame if that vanished. And I could see there are sort of different pressures on it, both in the US and in the UK.
Is it not already gone? Are there any true libertarian countries that still exist?
I don't think libertarian is the right way of describing it.
Well, liberal in the classic sense.
I think there are liberal elements to Britain, and there are liberal elements to America. I mean, maybe actually, and maybe this is the sort of thing that.
But we don't live in the society where, I can't remember which historian put it this way, but your only interaction with the state would be the occasional nod at the local beadle or posting a letter. That would be it. That was pre First World War. I
think this stuff is often overdone. In that,
well, no, we live in a huge bureaucracy now.
Sure, but I think to say that the state did not have like a significant presence in the life of the people is slightly incorrect, right? If I mean, obviously we're really being very haphazard with our dates here, but if the state can execute you for stealing a loaf of bread, if the state can press you into service in the Navy, if the state has the right to censor theatre and charge you with all sorts of crimes based on your kind of sexual and earlier religious activity, that is not actually super liberal. So in some ways we are much more liberal, and in other ways we are it's a very different type of state.
Yes. I totally agree. Not going to get press ganged, might end up in court for tweeting about immigration intemperately.
It's just a very different type of state, and I think the libertarian angle on this stuff is frankly deluded, and falls into that category of nice ideas, but not necessarily that historically justified.
We've strayed some way from our discussion of the King's visits. I think the final thing to say is that we're very glad at the hint of the King feeling acquisitive towards the moon. we fully endorse this.
Yes, I think what we have to hope though is obviously there are two routes into the Commonwealth. One is as an ex-imperial possession, which is a good way, and there's a worse way, which is as Rwanda has done, which is joining for a kind of vague cultural activity. Vague cultural sense. I'm very clear about the way that I would prefer the moon's accession to go.
Well, I think and this is another massive tangent, and I hope we can return to this for a full episode. But I think for a long time there's been a taboo in international law against saying that's mine, and that has been upheld pretty scrupulously by and large by almost every country in the world. It's very unusual and a great disturbance in the palace of international law when there is a war over territory, for instance. But a very interesting thing is going on at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. I think I was banging on to you about this the other night. Do you remember what's going on at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean?
Oh, what is this, the undersea mining?
Yeah, the nodules.
Yeah, go on, tell me about the nodules.
Yeah. No, it's actually really interesting. So at the end of the 60s, a Maltese delegate at the UN got up and gave a speech to the General Assembly and basically said that he'd seen, as many people had, that there was an incursion of greater human activity into the oceans, including the deep oceans. So oil and gas activity and laying subsea cables and exploring the mineral reserves that might be there. And he was basically saying we need to nip this in the bud. He said the high seas should be the common heritage of all mankind. Sounds pretty nice, right? Or it's that.
Well, it would sound nice to other people. I've recently come round to the idea that there is literally nothing scarier than a liberal coming over the horizon towards you.
Well, this is the thing, because if you're a third world diplomat, you hear the phrase "the common heritage of mankind," and you're like, "Whoopee, handouts!" And if you're an American diplomat, you got your head in your hands because you know that your country's going to be the one giving the handout.
Yeah.
So from that point, the UN was slowly moving towards regulating deep sea mining, and the amazing nodules, layers of metal which build up over tens of millions of years, and they're full of the kind of stuff that's very useful in electric batteries. And the floor of what they call the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, which is about the size of Western Europe and the Pacific, is littered with this stuff. It's like a potato field.
So surely these aren't metallic metal. They're oxides. They're like ores, right?
They are. Yeah, but at this point, the concentration of copper that is yielded by most copper mines is so much lower than it used to be that it might make economic sense to go down there, get even copper from there.
Interesting.
But the point that I'm working towards is that the UN resolved in. The UN has been trying in some shape or form since the late 60s, early 70s to at least make plans to regulate deep sea mining, and there's been a kind of moratorium on it since.
Well, I mean, the only memory that I have of deep sea mining, or sort of time that I've come across it, was in reference to this idea of banning it because
because Greenpeace hate it.
Well, yeah, because you trawl and it throws up a whole load of dust, right?
It does, and this is part of the problem because it throws up plumes of sediment, and this interferes with the wildlife towards the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, because it blocks the sunlight, and also
sometimes they feed on it, sometimes it kicks up. And not much is known about this because the mining actually hasn't been done, and that's basically because there's this body that the UN set up to regulate it. The International Seabed Authority still hasn't finished deciding how to regulate it.
So this is now how long is that?
This is more than 55 years since we're getting close to 60 years.
Most efficient UN department.
And so under President Trump, the US, who'd never become part of the International Seabed Authority because it's concerned about handouts and a few other things, they said, no more of this. We ourselves are going to issue mining permits. And so they've now started the process of doing that themselves for the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. And the reason that I find this so interesting is that the age of saying that's mine now appears to be back.
Wait, so this is in international waters. So this isn't like in the territorial waters of any country.
Yeah, so I'm just going to point to that. So here in the King Charles III space station, we have a map of the British Empire in 1886. So I'm just pointing out to Calum roughly where the CCZ, as it's called, is. It's in the Pacific to the west of America. So
on our map, listeners, this is sort of hidden behind a howdah,
a frog mounted emerging from behind a mounted elephant with a mem sahib atop it. And Japan is now in league with the States, and they're doing their own kind of mining of subsurface of subsea mud close to where they are. But I mean, why the hell did I bring this up? Yes, I bring this up because the King's comments about the moon, and it's clearly not a serious territorial play, right? But my sense is that the Great Game is back.
It's an interesting point because again, I will return to my discussion of Bismarck.
God, I feel like this is what it must be like to be Jessie, Calum's girlfriend.
Well, Tom, I think you, given that you are my landlord, probably see just as much, if not more, of this than her. So potentially she is spared because I know that I can dump this kind of stuff on you.
He's either snoring or talking about Bismarck. It's one of the two.
Ideal man.
I'm sorry, ladies. He's taken. Bismarck has even crept into the Flashman novel that I've been reading recently. Cannot escape the man.
He's everywhere. He's everywhere.
Well, I've got my own copy of that bit biography as well now. So we're both become Bismarck bores by the time we next record.
Bismarck boys. But the reason I raise it is because Bismarck is obviously at the centre of sort of huge political upset and transfer of territory between nations that supposedly, post Westphalia, this doesn't happen in Europe anymore. Everyone's very nice to each other, and we all recognise the right of all the other nations and states to exist. But what is so striking about Bismarck is, and maybe just this period more generally, is until really quite recently, this was not a accepted fact. So people have probably heard about, the Franco-Prussian War as the sort of precursor to the First World War and the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. But there were vast transitions and transfers of territory. Just the German unification alone, with things like Schleswig-Holstein, the kind of swallowing up of bits of the Rhineland, the elimination of the kingdoms of Saxony and Hanover, and then all the smaller German principalities. It's remarkable just how rare this period of states existing as consistent entities with fixed borders.
Yeah, well, I think we'll really miss it when it's gone.
Yeah, so I think whilst it is kind of easy to think that the only way that we can regain a sort of frontier or acquisitive sentiment is by going where it was previously impossible to go, i.e. space or the bottom of the ocean.
Aren't you forgetting something?
Or Antarctica. Which, actually,
Thank
Tom,
you.
I was laughing. as you were kind of pointing at the map. That having become kind of an expert in Antarctica, you've now decided on a new esoteric and obscure thing to become kind of the world expert on.
I am actually flabbergasted by how little people care about the Clarion-Clipperton Zone.
Try saying that again. Go on, you go say that again with a straight face.
I'm going to look her in the eye. Boys don't understand. Where was I? Just sort of transported back to all the conversations with women who just say, "Why won't you stop banging on about Antarctica?"
First dates just marred. But I think actually, I think Tom, you're very quick to accuse me of being
being a pub bore,
of being a Bismarck bore. When actually
different strains of autism. I fear. I mean, what I did want, I fear that the podcast just devolved into both of us saying autistically, but what I was about to say was, and each reversing to our prior idea of what the conversation should be. I want to just trail one exciting thing about the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. I'm just going to dangle it so that we can return to this in a future episode. I actually want people to listen to the CCZ episode. Britain feigns diplomatically to be all in favour of the kind of, we must be very careful, we must regulate this properly, but has sponsored 2 licenses for the CCZ. And there's a company that the UK has sponsors to have an exploration license, and this company is hoping to get an actual mining license from the ISA. And I spoke to the CEO, and this will be in an article, and I hope a podcast episode at some stage. So there is a crack of hope that the young British adventurer, having set up his diamond mine in Antarctica, could then go to the CCZ and launch a mining operation.
For a bit of metallic potato digging.
Yeah, so the king is wisecracking about this stuff, and we're not going to be the first of the moon. But as I said before, there are frontiers in this world, and if one consequence of the weakening the rules-based international order is that frontiers return, I think in this specific instance, that could be a very exciting thing.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Should we go for break? Play you listeners an ad or something, and then return for part 2.
That sounds good.
And part 2 will be your hollybobs.
my smutty postcards and dirty weekend in Margate.
All right, we'll be back for part 2.
And now, at 2300, the Interplanetary Shipping Forecast. Issued by the Interplanetary Meteorological Office on behalf of the Anglo-Futurist podcast. There are solar flare warnings for Mercury Bank, Venusian Wisps, the Strait of Shackleton, the Jovian Moons, Saturnian Rings, and the Dogma Bank Dukedom. The general synopsis at 1200. Coronal mass ejection, 2 million miles out from Sol, expanded rapid. Magnetic depression, Ceres sector, 984, moving steadily outward towards Jupiter. And now the area forecasts for the next 24 hours. Venusian clouds, proton flux 5 to 7, extreme or very extreme, thermal load, high energy particles at first in daytime, otherwise heavy ion showers, visibility moderate or good, occasionally poor in sulfuric haze, pleasure craft users advised to close windows. The southern lights, high energy particles cause vivid aurora over snow on the wold from 4 a.m. Airships advised to proceed as normal and enjoy the show. Asteroid belt, M7, busier than usual, showers of debris. Solar wind, high. Visibility, low. If you're going on a long journey, pack water, food, and blankets. Jupiterian moons. Interstellar wind, gale force 6. Headwinds, Ride, Callisto, Io, and Ganymede over following 48 hours. Power cuts expected on Europa. The British consulate will be donating SLRs to the Europeans. Rings of Saturn. Very high cosmic radiation at first, in leading edge. Otherwise, very rough or high. Gamma bursts and plasma snow. Transit to Pluto will be unaffected.
Listeners, welcome back to the King Charles III space station, where Calum has been playing a little slideshow of pictures from his hollybobs. Calum, where did you go?
You
are going to be playing out to a stereotype here.
Well, yes, I unfortunately, to my sort of great chagrin, chagrin. Chagrin.
As a Frenchman, Calum is trying to give the impression that he doesn't understand the language perfectly.
I didn't go and have a dirty weekend in Margate and Brighton and buy some smutty postcards. Instead, I went on a inter-hemisphere journey to Singapore to sort of inquire what was up, and having seen enough videos of LKY talking about having a sort of iron rod in him to see whether the myth was all that.
I like to think that the plane trip to Singapore is much like the plane trip to Turkey, famously well. So of course the trips to and from Turkey have to have these like Englishmen on the way. They've got their like Norwich like 24, and then on the way back they've got this like white padding, and they're kind of bleeding because they've all had their hair transplants, and like maybe they've had their teeth done as well. So my guess, the flight to Singapore, is that it was like absolutely full of like Adam Smith Institute types with their like Hayek under their under their arm, under one arm, and under the other arm is like From Third World to First by Lee Kuan Yew, which has been on my bedside table recently, I confess. And then
untroubled by any
well, because I tend to have Flashman on the other bedside table. So which is the one that's more attractive as a man is about to go to sleep? It's Flashman.
Well, Tom, obviously on the return, as you said, from Turkey, the men have their turkey teeth and scabbed heads, and the women kneel on their seats with their Brazilian bum lifts, so because they can't sit down. What would you imagine the Hayekians look like on the way back? What would be your guess?
I like to think that they've accidentally, just through coming from a disordered third world country like the UK at the moment, they've accidentally committed an infraction or two while in Singapore. Maybe they accidentally played the first couple of seconds of a voice note out loud on the tube or something, and then I assume that the local constabulary swept down on them and beat them, and so these poor Max Marlowe types are perhaps limping onto friend of the show.
Similarly to the Brazilian butt lift ladies, also have to kneel on their seats for their sore behinds.
Is this correct?
I don't think it is, unfortunately. I think actually,
has the magic gone?
Singapore struck me as a remarkable place that is now haunted by the ghost of its founder. And I mean, similarly, this applies to Bismarck, but this also applies to people like Ataturk. It applies to Charles de Gaulle. That there is this fascinating process by which, when he was alive, he didn't have as much of a cult of personality, but actually now, after his death, he is being turned into a real father of the nation. And my going there was part of this kind of project, because I was invited as part of a sort of political fact-finding mission. And the kind of this is my sort of view, the very historically contingent behaviors. So things like the extremely strict ethnic quotas for the sort of 80% social housing of Singapore, meaning that you can't have just Chinese or just Malay housing blocks, or the pivoting of initially clamping down on the use of the Chinese language, and then really turning hard and actually re-promoting it. All of this kind of messy stuff is either ignored or taken out of the context that it emerged from. Lee Kuan Yew is, in many cases, originally he was a Fabian socialist, right? And is instead becomes a sort of sanitized Lee Kuan Yew thought that can then be implemented across the world. Saudi Arabia 2030 references it. Kagame in Rwanda, friend of the show. References it. I wouldn't be surprised if Bukele references it. And I do wonder, I really wonder to what extent Singapore will be able to move beyond this legacy. That whilst this might have worked in a period of international liberalism and global liberalism, to what extent this attitude and some of the stuff, some of the actions that kind of are actively preventing the creation of the process of ethnogenesis, i.e., a true Singaporean people emerging, are kind of hindered because the decisions that were useful when this was a totally new state, 60 years ago, are now no longer adaptive. And actually, things like the extremely strict ethnic quotas, i.e. everyone on their identity card is gathered into either Chinese, Indian, Malaysian, or other, and the relative ratios of these groups are kept consistent over time. I do wonder whether some of this stuff actually becomes anti-useful, and actually the continued adherence by Singaporean politicians to this model might actually become dangerous. It was a real kind of question of mine when I was out there.
Well, it's interesting because the People's Action Party, as I understand it, is still in power.
Oh, wait, it's never been out of power, right?
Well, exactly. It's never been out of power. And as you like to say on this podcast, Cthulhu always swims to the left. And they have become a little woker, as I understand it.
They have. They've just brought in a sort of piece of anti-discrimination legislation for workers, and it's a sort of interesting process, very similar, dare I say, to our good friend Bismarck, who also, despite being an arch reactionary, found himself forced to bring in unemployment insurance and some form of social security network that still forms the basis of the German welfare state today. So I think it's an interesting process, and maybe that's a kind of argument against. That's evidence to the contrary or against what I'm saying, because maybe that's an example of, in a sort of Spenglerian sense, a nation growing up and going through this like process of developing.
What does it look and feel like when you were there? Was it all like gleaming skyscrapers, as the legends foretell?
It's somewhat gleaming skyscrapers. So there are specific areas that are very, very skyscraper heavy.
I imagine it's all very built up.
It is in some places. It's actually less so. It is remarkable, but they're not all kind of glass skyscrapers.
Was the Raffles statue still there?
There are two statues of Raffles.
Two statues of Raffles,
yeah.
which LKY kept.
Yeah, on the advice of this Dutch economist called Albert Vincemius.
Who was there for decades.
He was there for decades and kind of, is very, very influential in saying, look, if you go to post-colonial, HSBC isn't going to want to stick around.
Well, no, at the time when LKY took power, they really needed the support of the British military. Britain was withdrawing quite fast.
Well,
they knew they were totally defenseless.
But again, this stuff is interesting, right? Because he was sort of he's technically a post-colonial leader. And I don't think his views on Britain, which are now kind of set in stone as, Lee Kuan Yew always accepted the British heritage, and his decision to welcome multinational corporations was in place from the start. The sort of traditional view of Lee Kuan Yew thought, was not necessarily a given.
Does it feel remotely formally English?
It's a very good question.
I mean, my sense is that all this stuff recedes quite quickly.
So I would say, I spent some time living in Hong Kong, and so that's where my kind of comparisons are drawn from. And
I mean, Honkers was much more recently a British possession.
Yeah, and Hong Kong interestingly feels a lot more modern. I mean, I was there, over 10 years ago, but still I would have said that Hong Kong feels way sort of more glass and steel and hyper modern. There are two very interesting examples of, the Hong Kong administration for a long time refused to collect statistics about what was actually happening in Hong Kong, because they felt that when you have statistics, that might encourage you to meddle in the affairs of your people. I mean, it's a really, really hands-off attitude, which, compared to Singapore that gathers.
Our government just cannot compile the statistics. It's not that they're suppressing it. They genuinely don't know who's coming in and out of the country.
And actually would prefer to act without the statistics, right? Because the statistics might reveal unfortunate realities that wouldn't align with political expediency. But so, yeah, Singapore I think feels very interestingly like less modern, more unique in that respect. I think there is something very difficult about building in very hot environments that makes all buildings like degrade faster.
Interesting. I mean, incidentally, LKY, of course, said that. Didn't he say something along the lines of the single best thing he did for Singapore was just getting air conditioning installed, so people could actually work indoors?
Yes, that without air conditioning.
But it's probably quite. I mean, I suspect it's quite good for a growing country for their building stock to have some sort of to decay, basically, to kind of force you to rebuild.
I think this is a very, very interesting point, and I've been dwelling on this idea recently of like the hypermnesiac, which is the opposite of an amnesiac. So people who are unable to forget because the digital record and conservation and other forces mean that history is unable to recede into the distance. And instead, actually, you are permanently at the kind of mercy of I think what a sociologist, I can't remember his name, refers to as like a chosen glory. So for us, that would be kind of the Second World War, that you are forever stuck with the Second World War, like in the background.
It's like how the sink is forever caked in the remnants of your noodles from the night before.
Tom, but I would regard that as a living tradition, rather than a dead one. Because every night I reaffirm and rebuild those noodles. I remake them rather than preserving the ashes of my ancestors.
The worship of fire.
But at the same time, it is remarkable. It is remarkable the being there. Again, I think there's a whole load of questions. To what extent is it riding a demographic boom? It's a demographic. I think last year the TFR was 0.87. Yeah, which I mean,
after all the work LKY did to ensure that the most intelligent female graduates had the most children, only so long you can defy gravity.
It's a failure, right? And there's this very interesting tension whereby, because you have to maintain these ethnic ratios, and the Chinese majority, kind of 75%, have fewer children than the Malay or Indian sections. They have to bring in more Han Chinese, which then obviously creates more tension because they have not necessarily gone through this sort of similar process of Singaporeanization that the people who've grown up there have, which I must say is very strong.
Did you speak to many Singaporeans?
We spoke to a number of Singaporeans. It is remarkable how things that to us appear sort of extremely heavy-handed. So, be that, the sort of profusion of initiatives, all described by, kaleidoscope of acronyms, are sort of proudly referred to as core parts of the state. And the phrase, we are a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-language, multi-religion sort of nation, just repeated as this, mantra to me sounds like something you would do to almost deny an uncomfortable reality. I think it is remarkable to the extent to which this has been an effective process of state building in 60 years.
Are you saying that diversity is our strength, is actually something that we should live by?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that, and Hobsbawm talks about this, about how many of the traditions that we in the West think of as kind of ancient and perpetual are not as ancient as sort of they are made out.
You're coming
to be.
Across very Otto English. I'm expecting you to say, "Oh, fish, that fish was foreign," or some sort of lie to the effect that St George was not a kind of beer swilling football lad from the Midlands who loved a pint, loved fish and chips, loved going to the bookies.
I think the as with so many of these cases, the correct answer is like. The left-wing critical theorists are correct in their description, but wrong in their prescription, i.e. they correctly describe the reality that many sort of Victorians remade a lot of what we think of as ancient.
Yes, and I think sometimes they will make similar diagnoses of whole countries and say, and this I think does veer into fiction, but they will say things like, "Oh, there's always been immigration; it's never been kind of a homogenous," and this is part of a conscious or unconscious demoralization campaign. One might argue, and equally, and I think with some validity, a cultural critic might say of something like Morris dancing or neo-Gothic architecture, both equally important pillars of Englishness. They might say that Victoria just invented this stuff, like it was pastiche. Yes, to an extent it is pastiche, but what the Victorians did was lovingly draw together the remnants of those parts of culture that were in decline, and then reunited them to pass us something that is far richer than what would have been possible had they invented something from scratch.
Yeah, I think this is very true, and this is what I mean by that incorrect.
So it is a continuous thread from the Druids through Morris dancing to us. It's very kind of wavy.
Yeah, and as Orwell says, right?
Anyway. time for our little dance.
Stick clacking and bell ringing. Yeah, as Orwell says, right? How are you the same? How is the nation the same? Like now as it was 100 years ago, in the same way that you are the same as you were when you were a child.
Isn't that Bertrand Russell?
No, that's Orwell.
I think
The Lion and the Unicorn.
I feel he pinched it from Bertrand Russell. And Bertrand Russell is talking about personal identity.
Yeah,
I think, the picture of him as a child, the only thing I have in common is that he is me.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, as I say, the prescription is wrong in that you should take this as a useful bit of information, but as you say, draw on the past affectionately and remake it to be fitter for the current mode. I mean, I think you and I went and saw the HMS Pinafore together.
Yeah, we did.
The Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah, with Pamela, friend of the show.
With Pam. And I think I was struck by how slow it was. In that if you watch a lot of modern musical theatre, it's so fast. In that there are no beats between the songs. Every single moment of space and time is filled with some thing to grab your attention. And it got me thinking about what can we learn from this? And I think the answer is we need a sort of Singaporean project of hyperculture, in that we need to be able to take the fragments of the past.
Clips of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Blast it up. Speed it up to 2 times. Raise it up to 2 octaves and have Pink Pantheress rap over the top of it.
Yes, he is a major general. Yes, he is a major general.
But like, we have to adapt. We have to go forward. Things have to be made vital. And the people who kind of cling on to the old ways, I'm afraid, betray the lessons of LKY and Bismarck, because they fail to recognize that like the world has changed, and if you just aim for a kind of continuation, as the Red Queen says, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay still.
I think what you're describing is kind of stuck in the mud conservatism and nostalgism, which I think is a not wholly invalid response to the amount of change that's happened over the past century or so culturally. I can see how it makes perfect sense for your reaction to be, you just turn back the clock, no more change. But you are right, a truly vital society can move forward. I mean, do you have any examples of forward-facing hyperculture that you would like to instill?
Yeah. Methodism. No. And I say it with my tongue. Actually, I'm not going to put this down. Charles Wesley should be considered the Pink Pantheress of his time.
Why is that?
Because he took Anglicanism that had sort of ceased to be relevant to the urban and kind of deracinated workers, newly come in from the cities, which, let's be honest, that is surely far greater of a cultural upset than, oh no, we've got smartphones now. This is a whole like total change of your way of life. And using song and using like basically updated and modern sermonizing and methods and tools, was able to perpetuate and revitalize Anglicanism. And then obviously, you know, they branched off and made some mistakes, but I think there is a real lesson there. So I mean, to apply this here with hyperculture, I'll refer first to an example of it that I think I saw in Singapore, which was a dance performance, or sort of so-called.
Oh, I have in our notes the sexy dancing hijabis. Did you mean to put that in the show notes?
It's just a sort of helpful mnemonic tool to.
Was that Calum's internet history?
But we watched a sort of so-called kind of Malaysian cultural dance, and when we went and watched it, it was like reggaeton playing, like sped up reggaeton. Women kind of, you know, women and men dancing each other on the stage, you know, wiggling their hips around in what is sort of a highly limbic performance.
Exotic gyration.
Exactly. That should be kept solely for when one is horizontal. But
then,
yeah, exactly. But what was so interesting about it was they were dressed in kind of like cultural and traditional outfits, which allowed it to be palatable, I think, to a otherwise fairly conservative and not, you know, quite reactionary population sort of Malaysian Muslims, right? And you had hijabi women kind of cheering and screaming for, you know, at every hip thrust and bum wiggle, the pitch of the screams went ever higher. So I think it's a really interesting example of how modernity can be sort of garbed in traditional wear and be accepted really smoothly.
Yes, actually, I was fearing that the point you were tending towards was the British Caliphate won't be that bad. They'll be gyrating hijabis, but I see what you're saying. Yeah,
no, and I think actually that sort of stuff of like British Muslims becoming more fundamentalist is actually a sort of is a reaction to this, because it's a as many British Muslims do find that the rapidly secularizing and modernizing Middle East means that they feel kind of really at sea and instead have to become more fundamentalist as a way of kind of coping with being removed from a genuine lineage, which means they're having to be kind of like Protestant effectively.
But I think also many of the Pakistanis who've come here were from the most rural and one might say backward parts of Pakistan. That doesn't help either.
Well, Tom, let's not play down the genuine cultural innovations. How good do you reckon driving an Audi R3 and huffing on laughing gas from a balloon feel? Incredible. So don't knock it until you try it. But I think like this is just an interesting example of like how you can force a state into being, and actually the people who kind of turn against this stuff and think, oh no, Britain has never engaged or used these methods, I think potentially are going to have to accept that it's necessary in a modern bureaucratized world. If you can get your cultural practice, however fake and gay it is, onto the UNESCO, you know, heritage or list of intangible cultural artifacts, well, it almost becomes more real than things that aren't.
Progressives do it all the time, but it's part of culture, so we don't really notice.
Yeah,
it stands up more when there's other countries, doing like land acknowledgements.
So I think, exactly. So I think
and then it actually becomes ceremonial.
It becomes ceremonial. It becomes totally accepted, and you know, it only takes sort of 20 years before a generation of school children have been taught at primary school that this is just what we always do.
They will feel nostalgic about it.
They will feel nostalgic.
Doesn't take long.
Exactly. So I think people need to be extremely honest about the like tools that can be used here, and recognize that a sort of reactionary Britain. We will never return to a 50s, but you could have a Britain that feels more British or less British if you're willing to, use the tools of state formation.
One of the other things I want to ask you about regarding Singapore is what we can learn from it economically. I suppose there's this impression that it's a very free market kind of place, where, of course, the reality is that LKY was very interventionist and that the state builds loads of housing. So I wonder what the lessons might be in that regard. How, given that Singapore overtook us long ago in terms of GDP per capita, I wonder whether there's still lessons to be learned.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful when discussing Singapore because it is fundamentally a city-state. And I don't think we would look to, say, Monaco or Hong Kong or Luxembourg necessarily or the Vatican for no popery for examples on how to sort of run our state, our government, because it wouldn't make sense. The real answer of Singapore, and as I've sort of mentioned about this idea of like an ideology of a great leader ossifying into a dogma, is that the thing you can learn most from Singapore is you have to be flexible to exigent conditions. That the success of Lee Kuan Yew is his ability to look around and act decisively in response to trends that he saw taking place. I think that, to me, and I said, he pivoted multiple times, as did friend of the show, Bismarck, who first began as an uber reactionary, then allied with the liberals, then turned back and, found himself once again working with the Protestant reactionaries against the sort of socialists and Catholics. And I think we have to take that spirit of dynamism, that you must have the information at hand and be able to react quickly to it, and not try and produce a dogma that can be followed sort of step by step like a recipe.
Yes, more and more I feel that more important than proceduralism and perhaps even the separation of powers is the ability of the electorate to just change if things aren't going right. Give someone a chance to act decisively. If it doesn't work, they're out.
Yeah, I think this is true, and I think we really are spoiled by the fact that it's a lot harder, I think, to really mess up. And in some ways, I think Liz Truss should be really admired in this respect as someone who took a big swing. I don't think I'm enough of an economist to sort of accurately assess the results. It didn't, I don't think it's controversial to say that it wasn't the best move, but I somewhat admire that as a set of actions.
But I mean, it is funny. People in our circles like to say you can just do things. Liz Truss just did things.
Liz Truss just did things, and should be. And the lesson of Liz Truss is not that we need to put in structures to prevent that ever happening. Is simply we need to find a better Liz Truss.
The lesson is like you can do better and more considered things. Perhaps you can do things, but try and do it more strategically.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, and probably, I think paying your civil servants and your politicians more is good. I do think Singapore really struggles with a lack of entrepreneurialism and dynamism. So, Hong Kong, a friend of mine said that I'm not going to get this quote right because it's so ridiculous that I don't think anyone could possibly recreate it and do it justice. But it was something along the lines of, we need to accelerate the process of the veil of subjectivity or something along those lines. I.e., what I took from it, as a man not as clever as him, was that Singapore really struggles with the sort of necessary subjectivity and comfort with uncertainty that is necessary for artistic creation and entrepreneurialism. That I've been sort of making some notes, and I come up with this idea of the sort of no true Singaporean, which, you know, this is based on the idea, the no true Scotsman fallacy is that no true Scotsman puts honey in their porridge. So is a sort of a logical fallacy, because you're putting a characteristic before the actual definition, i.e. someone can be a Scotsman without X being true. Singapore is a fascinating state where actually they have assembled a list of putting honey in your porridge like statements, and simply by following them, one may become a Singaporean.
I think maybe it's wrong to think of Singapore as a place that is uniquely deficient in entrepreneurialism. I think in fact, it's only small pockets of the world where entrepreneurialism really happens. I mean, even in Western Europe, many countries struggle with it. One other thing that I'm curious about in Singapore, is it true that there is no gum to be seen, no chewing gum?
No chewing gum, no vapes.
I'm yet to meet a kind of heavy-handed style of policing regarding this the public realm that I haven't liked, but even vapes strike me as a little overzealous.
The vapes one was because people were using them to kind of smuggle THC containing products into the country.
Approved.
But no, I mean, it's a sort of what else? But it does mean that people smoke a lot, which I think is quite chic. Very, very sophisticated.
What about the personal responsibility and all the Singaporeans having to match their healthcare spending out of their own pocket and put money away every year towards it? The idea being that would impel them to behave more responsibly and lower the burden on the. Imagine if we did something like this.
Do you know who does do something like this?
Who?
Germany.
Oh my god. I think we should wrap up short. Any final thoughts on Singapore before we return to Bismarck?
Well, I have one final idea that I think is kind of interesting. There's a book called White Noise by Don DeLillo.
Yes, yeah. No, I've read it. Very strange book.
Very strange book. But I think one of the best bits of it is a section where he talks about the most photographed barn in America. Do you remember this, Ben?
It's a while ago since I read it, and it becomes. I mean, it's very postmodern, right? It becomes a thing of its own, and people want to come and photograph the most.
Exactly. So a farmer disappointed.
Is Heinrich the name of the son?
Heinrich is the name of the son, because the father is the founder of the field of Hitler studies. But the farmer, seeking to increase the amount of tourism to his neck of the woods, decides to declare his barn the most photographed barn in America. And this produces an endless stream of photographers who wish to add it to their collection, and thus makes it true. And I think Singapore is an extraordinary example of the success of this approach. That most people, if they were to consider going to Singapore, will go on Google and they'll look for top 5 things to do in Singapore. And if you can have a website that says there's one of Singapore's great tourist attractions is the light show, as it does say, the light show at Marina Bay Sands, which is the sort of famous 3-tower building that has a boat along the top. And every night there is this light show. People will come and see it. And you create a tourist attraction out of nothing. And the same thing applies to the Raffles Hotel and the Long Bar, where you go and have a Singapore sling and throw your peanuts on the ground. And
then you get beaten for throwing your peanuts on the ground.
It's the one place.
The one place is permitted.
The one place that's permitted. So you turn up in a bar that once would have housed kind of linen-suited hacks, sending copy over the phone. And instead, you've got sort of walking shoe and Gore-Tex wearing German tourists with their rucksacks on their back coming to sort of tick this off the list. And I think it is an extraordinary success where they have recognized that by simply naming something a tourist attraction or a cultural practice or something they are proud of, they have been able to summon a state out of nothing.
Well, I think there's an important distinction here between conning tourists who are very gullible and will just go to the thing that is highest rated on TripAdvisor, and actually creating cultural institutions. And we were chatting about this earlier. One thing that came to my mind was the mayor's St. George's Day celebrations in Trafalgar Square, and Unheard sent Wesley to Twat, who's a great feature writer, and he basically found that there was a sort of massive cultural void there because, of course, the mayor doesn't want to actually acknowledge anything ancestral to do with Englishness.
Yeah, so it's people waving St. George's flags.
Probably, waving a few, a kind of, multi-ethnic group of pearly kings, like waving some Morris dancer hankies. I don't know. Maybe some
don't let facts get in the way of
maybe like some drill music about a cup of tea or something. Who knows? But that kind of thing is not going to catch on. We like to think that a statue of Athelstan on the 4th plinth would.
Yeah,
that is our cultural hyperstition wish.
That is your desire. I have to say, Tom, I fear that it will not have the same impact as it once might have. For example, the subscription for General Haig, after he died, the subscription for a statue for him was massively oversubscribed, with veterans of the First World War sending money, at odds with the common lions led by donkeys narrative. And that, then a statue was a sort of meaningful part of cultural and national expression. And I fear that putting up a statue now does not necessarily hold the same place in a country's sort of sense of self.
That is why it's important. That is the whole point.
Interesting. Go on.
It is important because national cohesion is fading so fast, and because these stories are so infrequently taught at school. That is why it is much more important than it has been for us to have a shared mythology as a people.
So I agree with this. What I would maybe say, though, is you can't just stop at the statue. What you have to do, in addition to the statue then, is you have to have school groups that come past it and they will learn the story of Athelstan. And then you will have, events about it. And there has, moving more into your domain, Tom, than my own, this must be total football. You have to a full press. I think, is there a word, sort of a full spectrum attack? That's more of a war idea. That you are kind of pushing on all fronts so that an idea cannot be escaped. And I think that is the lesson from Singapore, is that if you are able to command the information production and are able to direct what people are seeing, what people are reading, and are just simply willing to say, in 20 years' time, we will have a nation, but it's going to take that long. I think you could do it.
And if we do this, perhaps some years from now, there'll be plane loads of precocious Singaporean nationalists coming the other way to learn from Anglo-futurist Britain.
Well, exactly. Coming with their already good hair and already good teeth and hopefully flying back with bigger beer bellies and a UK beast on their arm.
A UK beast and not an HCBG.
I think.
I suppose we don't want to give away the HC, but we want to keep the beasts as well.
We love.
But we'll be producing
both.
such a surplus because TFR will be so high that we'll be wanting
Exactly.
to send the beasts and HCBGs and expeditionary Clarion-Clipperton Zone exploring young Anglo-futurist captain of industries as well out into the world.
Exactly.
And with that,
Listeners. Go forth and multiply. Have some UK beasts.
have sex.
Please.
That's good. This one's going to be a nightmare for Aaron to. Well, you know what they say. Whoever produces the Anglo-Futurist podcast must have that iron in him.
All right, listeners. Thank you very much, and goodbye.